My brother's fiancée tried to cut me out of his life, but at their rehearsal dinner, I exposed her manipulation in front of everyone. Now, the wedding's off. I'm 32, male, and my younger brother's wedding is coming up in less than 2 weeks. I should be excited for him. I want to be excited, but I'm struggling to feel anything but dread. And the reason for that dread is Fiancée, my soon-to-be sister-in-law, S. Let me explain how we got here. It started small. When they first got engaged, S was tolerable. A little self-centered, sure, but nothing too concerning. I figured she was just one of those people who like to be the center of attention. Whatever. My brother, M, seemed happy, and that's all that mattered to me at the time. But as the wedding planning ramped up, so did SS' need for control. It was like everything had to be about her, and only her. She started making unreasonable demands, not just on M, but on the entire family. She'd accidentally leave my mom out of important decisions, dismissing her input with a fake smile and "Oh, I thought you'd be too busy to worry about that." She dropped these passive-aggressive comments about how I needed to step up as best man and do more to help out. The thing is, I was already helping. I offered to plan the bachelor party, coordinate with the groomsmen, and even chip in on some costs. But it was never enough for S. It all escalated during a family dinner about 6 months ago. We were sitting around the table, talking about the wedding, and S started going on and on about how she wanted everything to be perfect. That was fine. Who doesn't want a perfect wedding? But then, she casually mentioned how the guest list had been trimmed down, and I noticed a weird tension in the air. "What do you mean, trimmed down?" I asked, feeling like I'd missed something. S gave this airy laugh and waved her hand. "Oh, just some people who weren't a great fit for the vibe we're going for." I pressed her, and that's when she dropped the bomb. "We had to cut your friend T from the guest list. He's just, a little too rough around the edges. T has been my best friend since high school. Sure, he's a bit loud and blunt, but he's got a heart of gold, and he's practically family at this point." I couldn't believe she just uninvited him without even consulting me, or my brother for that matter. "You didn't think to ask me first?" I said, trying to keep my voice calm. S shrugged. "Well, M and I made the decision together. We just thought it would be better for the overall aesthetic of the day." Aesthetic. That's the word she used. I looked over at my brother, waiting for him to say something to defend me or T, but he just sat there, eyes down, not saying a word. I realized in that moment how much S had him under her thumb. He wouldn't stand up to her. He couldn't. "Seriously? You're okay with this?" I asked him directly, hoping for some kind of reaction. He just shrugged. "It's not a big deal, man. It's just one person." But it was a big deal. It wasn't about just one person. It was about the principle. S had made a decision that impacted me, my closest friend, and apparently my brother had just gone along with it. I left that dinner fuming, but I didn't want to cause a scene. I convinced myself that I'd let it slide for M's sake. That was mistake number one. Things only got worse from there. S started making subtle digs at me whenever we were all together. If I wasn't involved in something wedding-related, she'd make snide comments like, "Oh, I guess you're too busy to care about your brother's big day, huh?" And if I was involved, she'd find a way to criticize my efforts. Too little, too late, never good enough. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Maybe I was being too sensitive, reading too much into her tone. But then my mom pulled me aside one evening after S had left and said, "Is it just me, or is S trying to push you out?" My mom had noticed it too. That's when I knew it wasn't just in my head. This wasn't some petty personality clash. S was intentionally trying to alienate me, make me feel like I didn't belong. I tried talking to him about it privately, but he just brushed it off. "She's stressed, man. Weddings are a lot of work. Don't take it personally." I wanted to believe him, but how could I not take it personally? It felt like she was driving a wedge between me and my brother, and he was too blind, or too whipped, to see it. The final straw came 2 weeks ago. We were at another family gathering and S was in rare form. She was talking about the wedding again and made some comment about how she'd be relieved once it was all over, because then she could finally get him to cut ties with all the negative influences in his life. I felt my stomach drop. I knew exactly what she was implying. What do you mean by that? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. S smiled, that sickly sweet smile she always puts on when she's about to say something nasty. Oh, you know, just people who don't really add anything positive to our lives. People who cling to the past and don't want to grow. I felt my heart pounding in my chest. She was talking about me. She had to be. And she was saying it right in front of everyone, bold as anything. I hope you're not talking about me, I said, voice tight. She didn't even flinch. Oh no, of course not. But the way she said it, the way her eyes flicked to him, and then back to me, made it clear that she absolutely was talking about me. She was just too much of a coward to say it outright. M, again, said nothing. He just sat there, like a statue, letting her run her mouth without stepping in. After that, I left early. I couldn't be around them anymore. The next few days, I debated my options. I didn't want to miss my brother's wedding, but how could I stand there, pretending to be happy for him, when his fiancée clearly had it out for me? She was toxic. She was manipulating him, and I had no idea how far it would go after they were married. Then, last night, I got a text from S. It was short, but to the point. Hey, just making sure you'll be on time for the wedding. M really wants you there. It's important to him. No mention of her wanting me there. Just a guilt trip, wrapped up in the pretense of caring about what M wanted. I stared at that message for a long time, torn between anger and sadness. Was I really going to let her control the narrative? Was I going to let her push me away from my own brother on his wedding day? The days leading up to the wedding dragged by, each one filled with a gnawing tension in my chest. I still hadn't responded to SS text, and the guilt of staying silent was eating at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I didn't do something, I'd lose him forever. But what could I do? M was under SS spell, and she knew exactly how to manipulate him. I couldn't just talk him out of marrying her. That ship had sailed months ago. But there had to be a way to open his eyes, to make him see who S really was before it was too late. Then I remembered something my mom had said a few weeks back. She'd mentioned how strange S had been acting around some of MS friends, particularly the ones who didn't buy into her perfect image. I realized there might be a pattern, something I hadn't noticed before because I was too close to the situation. S wasn't just trying to alienate me. She was pushing anyone out of MS life who didn't fit her vision of control. Suddenly I knew what I had to do. I pulled out my phone and dialed T. My best friend, the same one S had cut from the guest list. He picked up after a couple of rings, his voice full of curiosity. Hey man, he said, didn't think I'd be hearing from you before the big day. You good? I'm not, I admitted, the words spilling out faster than I intended. I need your help. S has been isolating M. She's gotten rid of anyone who challenges her, and I think she's trying to push me out next. But there's no way I can let him marry her. Not like this. There was a pause on the other end, and then T sighed. Yeah, I've been hearing things, man. M hasn't been himself lately. I didn't want to push it, but I've noticed. What's the plan? I hadn't expected him to be on board so quickly, but I was relieved. We need to show him what she's really like. Not just tell him. He won't believe me. He's too wrapped up in her lies. We need proof. T was quiet for a moment, then he spoke with determination. I'm in. Let's get the guys together, the ones she's pushed out. I've heard stories from a few of them. If we can gather enough dirt, we might be able to break through to him. We set up a meeting that night. T, a few of M's old friends, and I sat down at a local bar to compare notes. It was worse than I'd thought. S had been systematically driving a wedge between M and anyone who could see through her. She'd convinced one friend to back out of being a groomsman by spreading rumors about him being unreliable. Another had quietly distanced himself after S accused him of hitting on her during a party. A blatant lie. But M had believed her. We pieced together enough to paint a clear picture. S wasn't just a little manipulative. She was dangerous. She was isolating M on purpose, making sure he had no one left but her. We need to confront him, T said, his voice grim, before the wedding. I nodded, but we need to do it in a way that forces him to see the truth. If we just go at him with accusations, he'll defend her, like always. That's when the plan came together. We'd wait until the rehearsal dinner, the night before the wedding, when emotions would already be running high. We'd gather everyone who S had hurt or pushed out and confront her and M in front of the family. If she tried to spin it, we'd have too many people backing up the truth for her to manipulate her way out. It was risky, but it was our only shot. The rehearsal dinner was held at a fancy restaurant downtown, the kind of place S had always loved to flaunt her perfect lifestyle. I arrived late on purpose, wanting to avoid any small talk before the confrontation. As soon as I walked in, I felt the tension in the air. South was holding court at the head of the table, laughing that fake, too loud laugh she always used when she wanted to make sure everyone knew she was in control. M sat beside her, looking tired but happy, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around him. I glanced around the room, catching the eyes of T and the others. They were ready. As dinner wound down and people started making speeches, I stood up. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was for him. I had to do this. I'd like to say a few words, I started, my voice steady, about my brother and his fiancée. S smiled, clearly expecting me to say something flattering. But that smile faded as soon as I kept talking. I've known him my whole life, I said, turning toward him. He's one of the kindest, most loyal people I've ever met. He's always been there for me and for his friends. But over the past year, something's changed. M frowned, clearly confused. What are you talking about, man? I'm talking about S, I said bloodily, watching her face darken. She's been driving a wedge between you and the people who care about you. She's cut your friends out of your life. She's manipulated situations to make herself the only person you can rely on. And it's not just me who's noticed. I gestured to the others around the table, and one by one, MS friends started speaking up. They recounted their own stories, how S had spread lies about them, how she'd isolated him, how they'd been pushed out of his life without even realizing what was happening. SS' face went pale, but she quickly regained her composure. This is ridiculous, she snapped. They're just jealous. They've always been jealous of our relationship. I turned to my brother. M, listen to them. All of them. They wouldn't be making this up. You know them. You've known them for years. And you know me. He looked around the room, confusion and anger flickering across his face. This can't be true. S, tell me this isn't true. S jumped in, her voice sickeningly sweet. Of course it's not true, baby. They're just trying to ruin our day. They've always been against me because I'm different. Different? T cut in, his voice full of frustration. You're not different. You're controlling. You've been manipulating him from the start. Shot him a venomous glare, but M held up his hand. Enough, he shouted. Standing up, everyone, just stop. The room fell silent. M looked at me, his face full of confusion and pain. Why are you doing this now? Why not before? Why wait until the night before my wedding? Because you wouldn't have listened before, I said softly. You were too wrapped up in her, and maybe you still are. But I couldn't stand by and watch you marry someone who's been hurting you and everyone around you. M looked back at S, searching her face for some kind of explanation, but for the first time, she didn't have one. She just stood there, eyes narrowed, clearly calculating her next move. But it was too late. Is this true? M asked her quietly, his voice shaking. Did you really do all of this? Soap in her mouth, but no words came out. That was all M needed. He turned to me, his expression one of utter devastation. I can't believe this, he muttered, his voice cracking. He stormed out of the restaurant, and I followed him outside, my heart hammering in my chest. M. I called after him, catching up to him on the street. I'm sorry, but you needed to know. He turned to me, tears in his eyes. I feel like an idiot. How could I not see it? How could I let her do this? I put a hand on his shoulder. You're not an idiot. She was good at hiding it, but you see it now, and that's what matters. For a long moment, we just stood there, the weight of everything settling between us. Eventually, M. shook his head. I can't go through with the wedding, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I can't marry someone like that. The wedding was called off the next morning. Looking back, I don't regret what I did. It was messy, painful, and it could have gone horribly wrong. But in the end, it saved my brother from a lifetime of manipulation and control. After the wedding was called off, S. tried to spin the story, but no one believed her. My brother M. went through a tough time, but eventually realized that breaking away from her was the best thing for him. We started rebuilding our relationship, slowly but surely, and it felt like the weight of her influence had finally lifted. It wasn't easy, but sometimes you have to take risks to protect the people you love, even when it hurts. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you have any thoughts, I'd love to hear them, so please leave a comment. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more stories like this one.